Hey, and welcome to Album April. It's April 1st, and today I listened to Led Zeppelin 4 by Led Zeppelin. Or, as it's known to laymen like me, the one with Stairway to Heaven on it. It also has Black Dog, which I know is held in very high regard. All it's missing is Kashmir, but what you gonna do? Actually, I learned in my research today that calling it Led Zeppelin 4 is technically inaccurate. Officially, this album has no title, but we call it Led Zeppelin 4 because, one, you gotta call it something, and two, the previous three albums were Led Zeppelin 1, 2, and 3. For a lot of the other bands and artists that I picked to listen to for this month, it was kind of a toss-up on which of their albums would be the one album representing them. Led Zeppelin was not that case. It seems to be pretty universally agreed that this is their opus. So now that we got the introductions out of the way, let's go to the 4 questions. First of all, what was my first impression of this album? I think going into it, I was kind of expecting all of it to sound like Stairway to Heaven, that very folksy prog rock type of thing. And there are songs like that, but the album starts out with Black Dog and Rock and Roll, which are pretty serious rock and roll metal type of songs. I mean, in a way, this whole album does kind of sound like Stairway to Heaven, because a lot of songs sound like the first half of that song, and a lot of the other ones sound like the second half of that song. When it comes to the sound, there's definitely a lot of fun instrumentation on this album. I definitely noticed the percussion in a lot of places, especially for sticks. There's also some fun synth, different instruments. Sometimes there are sounds that don't work. Like, at the end of 4/6, there's this really weird buzzing synth noise. But I was definitely able to appreciate the different instruments that they put in and the way that they were able to make them all weave together on a few of these songs. I would say overall, this album sounded about as good as I expected it to sound, and it sounded pretty similar to how I was expecting it to sound. Now, what was my favorite song on this album? I really did like the whole jailhouse rock vibe of rock and roll, and Moving to California is a very pretty song, but if we're being honest, Stairway to Heaven is absolutely the standout track from this album. That song is rock and roll legend at this point, and it's not hard to see why. It starts out with this very folksy, ethereal, almost medieval sounding stuff with the guitar and the flutes, and then it slowly and very gradually transitions into a hard rock song at the end. I will maintain that it doesn't really have this big impact moment that I really like in songs like this, but overall, the pacing and the way it was all put together, it's done very well. And I really did appreciate the way that the song ends with just the vocal and nothing behind it, and then there's no little musical sting at the end, it just stops. Stairway to Heaven is such a well-known, iconic song that it kind of feels like it just always existed. Like, it actually was a folk song from medieval times that was adapted into this hard rock song. So yeah, that is probably the most tepid, unoffensive take you'll ever hear from me this month, saying that Stairway to Heaven is the best song from Led Zeppelin 4. As for songs that I didn't like, there was really only one. I did not care for the Battle of Evermore. I don't remember any hook, I don't remember any arc to it, it just kind of spun its wheels for the whole time. And it's almost 6 minutes long, so it felt extremely flabby. Stairway to Heaven really made use of its long runtime. I don't think the Battle of Evermore did, and it got annoying towards the end of it. In fact, that's one critique I would have for a few of the songs in this album, feeling like it was just kind of going in circles when it could have just ended. I definitely felt that way about When the Levee Breaks, which is the album closer. I mean, you can just sort of wail on your instruments for a few minutes at the end of your song, but is it necessary? Sometimes it's not. Just saying. And the last question, does this album hold up? Well, Stairway to Heaven definitely holds up. A lot of the songs on this album hold up. But when you're looking at the whole thing, yes, I'd say overall there is a lot more good than there is bad, but they're not exactly connected into an album statement that I could discern. I don't really know what advantage there would be to listening to the whole album every time as opposed to just picking out your favorite songs from it. But I wouldn't say that I didn't have an interesting time listening to Led Zeppelin 4. It's a pretty good album, and I think a very good way to kick off Album April. See you guys tomorrow.